Talk.
Okay, I don't know. Hi.
You say anything else?
I don't know.
Say Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And say you got your second shot. Yay! And you were brave, right?
I actually didn't cry on this one.
You did not cry at all, and we're very proud of you for it. So, good job. All right, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Say bye.
Bye.
I'll see you in a little bit.
Okay.
All right, go ahead and close the door. All right, everyone, welcome back. As you heard, she got her second shot and did a whole lot better with the second shot than she did with the first one. We're glad for that. That's a sigh of relief for us, and now we just wait till we can see our last one and see when Noah can get his shot. We didn't finish all of chapter 17 last time. We finished at chapter 20 or verse 23. So we're going to do start at verse 24, and then we're going to go into chapter 18. We're going to go through chapter 18 to verse 18. And so, because we're going to focus specifically on Absalom's death, we're not going to we're not going to go into the mourning or anything else. We're just going to kind of actually no, I'm sorry. Let me correct myself. We are going to finish on verse 33. I thought I actually stopped halfway through it, but we're going to go through all of chapter 18. We're going to just finish chapter 17 because the sort of the story is kind of mixed between the two chapters. So, starting at the beginning of chapter 24, David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of Jether, an Ishmaelite who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Ammiel, from Lodabar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogelim, brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley and flour, and roasted grains, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from the cow's milk for David and his people to eat. For they said, the people have become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed them over the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds. David sent out his troops, and a third under the command of Joah, a third under Joab's brother Abishai son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. The king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. The king answered, I will do whatever seems best to you. So the king stood beside the gate, while all his men marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel. The battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that way were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in a tree. He was left hanging in midair, while the mule he was riding kept on going. When one of the men saw what had happened, he told Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. Joab said to the man who had told him this, What, you saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt. But the man replied, Even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand upon the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me. Joab said, I am not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart, while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor-bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, Let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hands of his enemies. You are not the one to take news today, Joab told him. You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today because the king's son is dead. Then Joab said to a Cushite, Go tell the king what you have seen. The Cushite bowed before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said to Joab, Come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite. But Joab replied, My son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that will bring you a reward. He said, Come what may, I want to run. So Joab said, Run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gateway by the hall. As he looked out, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. The king said, If he is alone, he must have good news. And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, Look, another man is running alone. The king said he must be bringing good news too. The watchman said, It seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He is a good man, the king said. He comes with good news. Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, All is well. He bowed before the king with his face to the ground and said, Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who have lifted their hands against my lord the king. The king asked, Is the young man Absalom safe? Ahimaaz answered, I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was. The king said, Stand aside and wait here. So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, May the Lord the king hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all those who rose up against you. The king asked the Cushite, Is the young man Absalom safe? The Cushite replied, May the enemies of my lord the king, and all who rise up to harm you, be like that young man. The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept, and he said, Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son. And so, as we see here, and it's kind of sad as you think about the way this ends. If we kind of go back and really start on the beginning here, let's talk about the battle, and then we'll get to Absalom's death. David has crossed over, and the first thing we hear about is actually talking about the fact that people brought out, and they brought, correct that, brought out food and drink and everything, and that's actually critically important. I think the reason we were told that is, remember, they were fleeing; they had very low in supplies, and one of the things really critical in battle, as we're getting ready to start in a battle, is a well-fed, well-provisioned army. Generally speaking, even if outnumbered, will always defeat one that's fighting on a hungry stomach. That's critically important. Here we see that before the battle, we see that they are able to actually get nourishment, which they absolutely need. Now, as we get to the actual battle itself, one of the most interesting parts here, and something I want to really talk about today, is we see that when David musters them, he gives a third to Joab, to Abishai, and then Ittai. And then the king adds, I will march out with you. But the men said, You can't go out, and actually says, frankly, if you're in there, all they will care about is you. They will look to kill you. You are worth so much compared to the rest of us. And David wisely takes this advice and stands back. Now remember, even though David is older now than what he was when he was fighting as one of the great generals for Saul, if just to remember, he's a great warrior. He's a great general. The reason why Saul became jealous was because of the song of that was saying that David killed his tens of thousands or thousands, I can't remember, and Saul had killed his thousands, saying that David killed more than Saul. That's actually one of the prime reasons that started the jealousy of Saul. So we know that he's a good warrior. We know he's a good general. We know he was one of the right hand men of Saul during Saul's reign, before Saul turned against him. So he's good. He's good. He has a valid right and a valid responsibility to be in the army at this time. But everyone else actually says no. If you're in the army, all they will focus on is you. You will bring undue pressure, especially to the part that you're fighting in. Because just like chess back in the day, and history says this many, many times, especially back in this period of time, You kill the king, the war is over. The rest of it doesn't matter. And so they know he is one critical person that if he goes down for the rest of the army, it's over. They're better off, in fact, without him. And he makes that tough decision. It could not have been easy to set aside and not be part of that, especially back in that day when it was understood he had to be in the battle. This had to go against every bit of his grain. And I really want to focus on that because it's hard for all of us, especially on things that we've worked really hard on. It's really hard for us sometimes to set aside our own need to be in the middle, even in tough circumstances. We a lot of times we like to be in the middle of things. We want to be leading things. We want to be right in it. And one of the hardest things sometimes to do is to make a wise decision when for some reason it's not good for you to be in the middle of it. It's hard to step away. Sometimes it's hard to say I'm not going to be the leader of this. Someone else is. Someone else is called to lead at this time. But it's really important. We've talked about the phrase about all of us have a different role in Christ's kingdom. And with that, there are times where we will be leaders and we will be called to be leaders. There are times where we will be called to be followers. And we need to understand as best we can what those times are. We need to understand that things are there are more important things than our own need to be important, and that's very critical. It's very most of us have a need in our own mind, in our own perception, to be important in the world. But sometimes, a lot of times, it's more critical for us to just be in support, to help others who are leading at the time. And David does that very, very, very well. And this is not just like on big projects, big decisions in your life. And I'll give you an example. One area that I am really, really bad at, and I need to do better on. I love to interrupt people. And my wife will tell you she will start a phrase and I will finish it, or she will start to explain something to Ava and I will try and explain halfway through there. I won't let her finish. I decide that it's more important for me to get my 2 cents of advice in there over top of somebody else. Even in something that's simple where we talk over each other, or sometimes we don't even listen to someone. We're already creating our own argument back to them, our own comment back to them, even if we're not arguing. A lot of times we're thinking of our response and not really listening to the person. We're just saying that we're going to lead this regardless of what the other person says. So on a day-to-day basis, we need to make sure that we think about David here and remember that sometimes we need to actually set our own need to be important, need to be in the middle of it, and set aside. Sometimes we are to lead, and we need to step up when those are, but sometimes, a lot of times, we just need to be in support. Now, what we see here is they have a battle. They note that the battle is in a forest, and that the forest actually takes out more people or loses more people than the battle itself. Probably the reason we're told about the battle is one, it's important to know where the battle takes place. That's sort of a record keeping thing with historians, and this historian is one of the people writing this. But it's also important because it tells us a little bit about how the victory came about. It's very likely, and I don't know the details of this particular forest, but the forest likely made it so that David's army, it sort of canceled out the numbers. It's highly likely because of the fact that Absalom called the entire nation of Israel against the followers of David. It's highly likely that David was way outnumbered in this battle. And what happens is by using the forest as where they're going to fight the battle, especially a dense forest, it sounds like it frankly, quote unquote, swallowed up people. We likely see a situation where it canceled out the numbers. And it became the fact that skill, which David's people definitely had, that became the bigger advantage. And so if we want to talk about how David was victorious or how his army was victorious, the landscape here made a huge difference in this battle. And we see that here. So, we shouldn't discount the fact that it was taken in force. We shouldn't just take this, oh, that's a fact. That was a critical factor in the victory. If this would have been on a very open area, a wide plain, David's army likely would not have a chance because the entire army could literally just envelop, go completely around the army. And anytime that happens, usually the people defending in the middle, David's army would be defeated. But because of them fighting in the forest, he was able to turn what would have been a huge disadvantage in numbers into a sweeping victory. And now we get to Absalom. And just make note, we talked about his hair and a couple chapters ago about why Absalom's hair was important. We said it would come back into the story, and here's where it does. That his hair, which is considered this very thick hair, actually gets wrapped up into a tree, pulls him off of the branch, and if this wasn't such a serious chapter, it would almost sound like something out of like Monty Python, some sort of comedic slapstick occurrence where his hair gets stuck and the mule keeps going. It sounds like that. But this is, what we see here is he is trapped. He can't go anywhere, and he can't even fight anymore. He is at the mercy of whoever comes up on him. And some of the people from David's army come up, and they go to Joab, and they tell Joab, "Hey, we got Absalom." And Joab immediately goes, "Why didn't you kill him?" And the guy reminds him, "Well, frankly, the king told us not to kill him. It's his son. Why would we do that?" And Joab, making no qualms for himself, says, "Okay, I'll go kill him." And so he thrusts the three javelins into his heart. The armor bearers help to kill him, and they kill Absalom. Um, and this is where I want to focus a little bit of time on Joab, but more on David. Um, and just stay with me in this vein a little bit. This is not the first time Joab has went against David in not killing somebody. And if you remember, very, very early on, I believe it was Abner, who was, the de facto leader, not the king, but the de facto leader of Israel at the time, came to hand the kingdom to David. Now, Joab was his enemy. If you remember, Joab had sort of a blood feud with him because he had killed Joab's brother. Even though David had given Abner the king's peace, Joab still killed him, intentionally, knowing he was going against the king's peace, disobeying him outright. Now, at that time, we hear David curse him or say, "May God curse you for this." But other than that, we don't see any physical punishment here. Instead, Joab stays leader. Now, maybe Joab was so good of a general, maybe he was so critical, maybe because of his family, who knows, that he didn't personally punish him. He was the king. He was the law. David had every right to punish him in whatever way. Strip him of his lands, banish him, execute him. He had every right and the authority. But he doesn't. And now we see here where Joab once again, here's an order from the king. Don't kill Absalom. Treat him gently, I believe is roughly what the words he says here. And Joab says, "Nope. No, that's not going to happen. Give me those javelins," thrusts them in the heart, and kills the son of the king against the king's wishes. It's very easy here to blame Joab. And to be clear, the ultimate person responsible here is Joab. Joab absolutely is the person who went against the orders of the king. He is wrong. He murders Absalom. He's, in my opinion, treasonous to his own king. But we also shouldn't ignore David's responsibility. David knew of Joab's behavior previously. If David would have taken a more hardline stance and really brought a harder amount of justice down, in this case on Joab, for violating the king's peace and for disobeying a direct order of the king himself, Joab likely wouldn't have been a general. He would have likely been banished. Maybe he would have come back, but he would never been in a position to be in such high enough authority, and likely also not seeing himself as high enough within the kingdom to make his own decision about Absalom and killing him. And so David, by a bit of his inaction in previous chapters, is in some ways partly responsible, or at least, if not responsible, partly a party to what happens next. And the reason I kind of string this along like this is for this reason. when things go wrong in our life, even if it's clearly somebody else's fault, and there are obvious times where other people cause bad things to us that do wrong to us. But in a lot of cases, if we think about it, if we really walk through what happened, even if it's a long period of time, we likely are culpable in some way, shape, or form for some of the things. And so when someone wrongs us, it's easy to get justified in feeling like we should punish the person or find our own form of justice. But in some ways, we also, at the same time, need to look at, did my hand play a role, or what hand did I have in this role that eventually wronged myself? A lot of times we have a little bit of culpability in it. This is actually a lesson that we've been trying to instill a little bit in Ava as she's getting older. And I'll give you an example. Recently, I can't remember what it was. We were playing something, and I kept saying, "Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this." Oh, I remember it was. We were wrestling. We were horse playing. She likes to wrestle. She likes to pounce and do all that stuff. And um, we were playing a game, and I sort of, the way she kind of turned, she fell over. She kind of fell a little hard, and she felt hurt. Her immediate answer was, "Is why did you let me do that? Why did you, Daddy, let me hurt myself?" And immediately I said, "Honey, you're blaming me for something, but me and you were roughhousing. That's gonna happen sometimes. Yes, I'm the one that, as we turned, you're the one that got hurt, and we were wrestling, but we were horse playing. That's sometimes what happens." And mommy immediately comes in and says, "Frankly, I don't like either of you two horse playing the way it is, and I've told you 1,000 times both of you shouldn't." So, and then she goes, "So Ava, yes, Daddy's horse playing. Yeah, Daddy was, you slipped and fell, and the way Daddy was kind of wrestling with you, kind of, yeah, it looked like he kind of fell in a certain way and hurt you. But, honey, you're horse playing. That's what happens." And so a lot of times, it's very easy for us, especially in the heat of a moment, to blame somebody else for something going wrong. But in a lot of cases, even if it's small, we need to recognize our own faults in those circumstances. So as we close today, something that I think we should always try and do, as we see here, is we always need to keep an open mind to everything not being completely clean, completely obvious. That it's very easy to say this was Joab's fault, um, and Joab is wrong, and he absolutely is. But I do wonder if David himself had a little bit of this issue. Now, one of the reasons I bring this up, and as we close here, and we kind of close this part of the chapter of the book with Absalom's death, one of the things I think is really critical is, we are now living thousands of years away from when this occurrence happened. Um, and it's very easy just reading the scriptures. A lot of us, when we talk about David's faults, the one that we initially think about is, when he has an affair, and he sends and he sends the husband to the front to die. And a lot of times when we talk about the transgressions or the faults of David, we all focus on that one because it's an easy story to remember. But there's a lot more than that. And what I see here, and if you read the whole story and really read the details and kind of read a little bit between the lines and look at what's going on here, I see a king who actually has a lot more flaws than what we necessarily show. And I think the reason is because we know he's a legend now. He has went from being a factual human being with flaws and a complicated life to now he is a complete kind of legend. And we need to remember that he was a human being with lots of flaws. He obviously apparently was not assertive with Joab when he should have been. We know he had a lot of wives. We know that that causes a lot of lustful issues in his life. He did not. He also didn't really, between Amnon and Absalom, he completely messed up that. We see a person that actually has some leadership difficulties in Israel after he takes over the country, and so it's easy to kind of deify him, make him a legend, but we should remember that he has all these flaws. Now, if that sounds heretical, it sounds like heresy to you, and I apologize. But what I'm trying to get at here is that shouldn't discourage you from looking at him, but it should encourage you that a man with this many flaws can still be this close of a follower to God, to Christ. Because the fact of the matter is we all have this many flaws in different shapes and forms. But what we see here is despite all of those flaws, we see a man whose descendant will eventually uh, bring salvation to all of us. And that's something we should treasure. We should treasure and be emboldened to live as best we can towards Christ, despite the flaws that we have. Because every day, God and Jesus is trying to make us better than we were the day before. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the message that you bring us. Help us to, you know, be able to step back and be humble when we are not to be the leaders. Help us to make sure we are stepping forward when we are, and help us to be mindful enough to know which time is which, and hear you clearly in which way we should be at all times. Also, help us to always be reflective and examine our own motivations. Help us to always understand where we fall short. Help to do better, but also understand that sometimes when bad things happen to us, we need to look in the mirror because a lot of times we have our own hand in our own issues. Help us to always grow in you and help us to not be discouraged by all the flaws that we have, but let us see them and then help you and ask you to help guide us to refine and be better every day that we can. And we ask for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you all for watching again. We will be back here next week at 6. Just remember, church is at 10:45 in the morning. We are doing it in person. We are also watching virtually. I hope everyone has a great night, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you all.